Episode 91, Reaching for the Stars with Dr. Misty Carty.
In just a few weeks, on October 14th, we are going to witness here in New Mexico an annular eclipse. So that's a solar eclipse where the moon doesn't completely cover the sun. So we'll have a ring of fire.
Welcome, fellow STEM enthusiasts, to the STEM Southwest podcast, your source for all things science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This podcast is designed to create STEM connections, cohesion, and elevation. This is a place where STEM enthusiasts gather to learn about some amazing STEM rock stars and activities of the Southwest and beyond that are impacting the world. If you have longed to be united with your fellow STEM nerds, then you've found your people here at STEM Southwest. And now, here are your hosts, Bob and Shelley.
Hey everybody, I'm Bob.
And I'm Shelley.
Together we are STEM Southwest.
Well, Bob, this interview is an interesting one, but I have to, we laughed quite a bit before we started, hit the record button, and that might have translated a little because we were having such a great time with our guest.
Our guest is Dr. Misty Carty. She calls herself an informal educator, but she is so much more. She's a published author. She is a astronomer aficionado. There's so much she shares during this interview. There are some things I'd like to point out as you listen to this interview, even watch it online, actually, more importantly. If you take a look at what she's wearing a dress that has stars on it, but more importantly, if you can get a glimpse of her earrings, they are 3D printed eclipse earrings. Now, I've never seen anybody wear earrings like that, so I was extremely impressed. She is very much into her craft.
She loves the 3D print.
But she's very much into her craft.
Yes, she is. She's incredible.
Yes.
I get the opportunity to work with her on a very frequent basis, and I'm super excited about that. She does a lot of work with us in our Girls into Tech program. And so I just wanted to make sure the world got to meet Dr. Misty Carty. And also the timing couldn't be more perfect because we here in the Southwest, and if you're listening to STEM Southwest podcast, maybe you're in the Southwest too, but we are in for a duo of solar eclipses. And she explains that to us. If you don't know a lot about the solar system, she makes it sound super easy, and it's very interesting.
Well, she shares a little bit why we're seeing more solar eclipses than we might have seen in the past. I mean, they've always been there, but it's based on the location. That I certainly learned a lot about that.
So did I. Absolutely. So we wanted to make sure that our viewers got this very special episode just in time to enjoy solar eclipses and perhaps some of Misty's props and her stories of not only astronomy, but also just other things that she's passionate about as a scientist.
And she doesn't speak like a scientist, and that's no disrespect to scientists. I've been around many of them. I have the utmost respect. But sometimes when you get very much into your field, very technical, you tend to speak at that level. I worked a number of years with environmental issues. We threw acronyms around like nobody's business, and somebody comes to the room, they have no idea what you're speaking about. So she has this ability to basically translate into maybe everyday language. I'll use that as far as understanding. And when we understand it in everyday language, we can appreciate it and we can actually maybe contribute to that effort versus being this apart in space as far as the technicals don't communicate with the non-technicals.
She has a great STEM story. I'm not going to give away any of her STEM story, but I want to make sure people tune in.
Right.
And you have something
There's
to
one
say,
more
and
thing.
I'll throw it to the interview.
So we are very relaxed at times during an interview. So we had a certain dog here. And so I want to make it clear.
Our dog was a guest.
I want to make it clear, if you hear a growl, it was Dr. Misty.
It wasn't my tummy.
Right.
It was the dog.
Just would throw that in there just to give you a heads up to that. But yes, let's get the interview.
Welcome to our home.
Yes. Let's get an interview. Very, very a lot of good information, and we will make sure we include what Dr. Misty speaks about links in the show notes. Everybody, Shelley and I are really excited today because we have a doctor in the house, but not just any doctor. a doctor with an affinity for the stars. Dr. Misty Carty is with us today. Yes. And Misty, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here with both of you.
Well, we typically ask our guests what their STEM story is. And so we know you have a pretty interesting STEM story. And in particular, what made you interested in the stars? So turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I think my mom would say that it was because she took me to see the Neil Armstrong exhibit in Dayton, Ohio when I was 2, but I don't remember that. But what I do remember is that when I was in elementary school, I got to go to a planetarium show, and I learned that Pluto wasn't our last planet at the time. So, and this was in the 80s. And we still learned all of the 9 planets, and Pluto being the last. But what I heard was Pluto was actually not the last planet currently. It was inside of Neptune's orbit. And so technically the order went Pluto, then Neptune at that time. And it wasn't going to be the last planet again until I graduated high school. And so there was a 20-year period of time from 79 to 99 when Pluto wasn't the last planet, even though that's what you learned in school.
Oh, Pluto has such a story, right? Especially for us New Mexicans.
Yes, I know. So it is technically a dwarf planet now. So still part of the solar system, just not one of the major planets. Yes. But this was back when we still considered it a major planet.
It actually was a little devastating at that time because, again, you go to school, you learn the solar system and that, and then they pull the rug out from under us. And I honestly remember people getting petitions together to try to bring it back into the solar system. It was kind of insane, although we're not going to visit in our lifetime based on current technology, but I'm glad at least it's got its dwarf planet status back.
Well, and I can make you feel a little bit better because technically in New Mexico, Pluto is still a planet.
I just read that recently. Yep. Or you might have told me that.
You cannot make that statement without a little explanation.
So, yes, I believe it was 2007, the state legislation here in New Mexico, because of Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto, decreed it by New Mexican state law that when Pluto is overhead in the state of New Mexico, it is a planet.
Yes. Okay.
Not just a dwarf planet.
Not just a dwarf planet. Yes. It's still considered one of the 9 planets. So I always leave that open when I bring that fact up to teachers. I say, it's up to you how you want to teach that and test on that.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you follow the New Mexico Wild West way or go along with national whatever?
Right.
So
I've completely derailed.
That's okay.
My focus on Pluto, I need to just move on. But tell us more about your STEM story.
Well, so that planetarium show and learning that Pluto wasn't the last planet, even though I had just recently had to learn the planets in order, sparked a lot of curiosity for the stars and space. And that kind of snowballed into when I got to actually take physics in high school. And I really jived with the physical equations and felt like there was an order to the universe that I could calculate and determine things. And I was encouraged to go on to college and explore if that was a field that I wanted to go into. And I did. And then when I was in college, my professors noticed that I was very studious and said, hey, you might be a good fit for going on to graduate school. And I chose astronomy because I got to do a project about lunar libration in college and really, really enjoyed learning more about space and decided to go on and get my PhD in astronomy and move on into my career. I think the thing that I've enjoyed the most that I didn't know when I was young, and I should have, because I often got in trouble for talking in class, is that I like to talk a lot about science and space. So being a science communicator and educator has really been my passion since I've kind of discovered that's where my strengths lie.
I love that because a lot of times we have guests on STEM Southwest podcast who maybe didn't recognize that they really enjoyed communicating with others about their form of science. And it took a while to grow those skills or whatnot. And I personally have watched you in action. I guess full disclosure that, not only are you an amazing STEM educator, but that also we do a lot of work together. We collaborate in a lot of different ways. And so it's been a real privilege watching you and watching youth respond to you. Just for instance, Bob knows and some of our viewers know that just last week we did a workshop for 36 girls in Mexico. And actually, Dr. Misty was the one that led our workshop on astronomy and specifically the solar eclipse duo.
Yes.
So that's kind of what led me to today. I was like, why aren't we talking about this on a podcast interview? Because even in the STEM Southwest listener world, I bet there are people that don't realize the special significance of what's coming up in the next few months that we're going to get the opportunity to witness.
So in just a few weeks, on October 14th, we are going to be witness here in New Mexico from the Four Corners region all the way down to the lower eastern bordering Texas. We're going to have an annular eclipse. So that's a solar eclipse where the moon doesn't completely cover the sun. So we'll have a ring of fire where the moon is not covering up the edges of the sun, grace our skies. And so it's kind of a cool coincidence because nobody planned it this way, but it happens to be happening on the second Saturday morning of International Balloon Fiesta, which is our biggest event here in Albuquerque. And a lot of plans are in the works. And yes, Shelley, to your comment about people just realizing that this is going to happen, we've been fielding calls all week about the fact that a lot is happening at the Balloon Museum, where I also help out with the Balloon Museum Foundation and people trying to see if they can participate in the festivities that will be happening that morning. We're going to have NASA, NOAA, and the NSF have programming from 8 until 1 on the 14th on the museum lawn. We'll have everything that's normally going on with Fiesta down on Fiesta Field on the park there. But then on the Balloon Museum lawn, they're also going to be having solar viewing with telescopes, solar viewers, sun spotters, and then we'll be having talks from scientists from both NASA, NOAA, and then the NSF as well, National Science Foundation. It's going to be a very, very big, exciting day. And then to top it off, there are now scheduled to be 72 balloons, hot air balloons, that will inflate and glow during the just over 4.5 minutes of maximum annularity. So the maximum coverage that the moon will be covering the sun. So there'll be a special balloon glow about 10:35 in the morning.
I believe that's the first ever balloon glow to happen in the middle of the day, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
In fact, our viewers and listeners know that I am an avid balloon chase crew member. And one of those 72 balloons is actually Heaven Bound 2, as in TOO, and that's the balloon that I crew for. So our crew will be out there and have the privilege of lighting up midday. So that's super exciting. I know the balloonists are so excited. It's going to be spectacular, like maybe first ever. I don't know for sure, but I bet you do, Misty. Is this the first time ever?
So for definitely for Fiesta, this is the first time that we will be having balloons doing a glow during the middle of the day. Normally we have our balloon glows in the morning or in the evening. I don't know about around the world, unfortunately. We could look it up if you want.
No, but that's a really good question, a really good point. Like, why is the eclipse only happening? I mean, I know it's happening in New Mexico and in other parts of the Southwest, and that's a big, maybe scientific explanation, but can you simplify that for us a bit?
Yeah, so the reason why it's happening, it's not just happening over the Southwest, it will be happening over the Pacific Ocean, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, and then the Yucatan Peninsula, and heading out over South America as well. We're really excited about it here in the United States because of that Southwestern Four Corners connection that we had. It'll start in Oregon and it'll go through Nevada and Utah down through the Four Corners, and then Mexico, followed by Texas, and then out over the Gulf, and then the Yucatan Peninsula. And that all just happens to be with that alignment between the sun and the moon and the earth, and when we have the moon going in front of it.
How are you getting the word out? Because I often see things come across my screen about eclipses, all these special events coming up, but I haven't really heard about this. So how are you getting the word out? I know you're getting calls from folks, but...
It's been really popular on social media and also on the Balloon Museum on the website. NOAA, NASA, and NSF just announced their schedule for what events are going to be happening that morning. There's also lots going on around the state. So here in the Albuquerque metro area, University of New Mexico is opening up the stadium for people to come and view the eclipse there, and they have their own programming. Believe most of the museums are also having their own. So the Nuclear Museum, Flora, Natural History, everyone's trying to take part. And then further out into the state, a lot of the state institutions and historic sites are also scheduling programming for people to come. And I think as far as getting the word out, there's a little bit of a disconnect. This is where science communicators and educators try to come in and help. There's a little bit of a disconnect between people who are enthusiastic and consider themselves eclipse chasers. So they've had this on their radar for a really long time, and they booked their hotel rooms for Albuquerque like 3 years ago. When hotels open up their booking for events, is usually about 3 to a year out. And then the general population. So I've been trying to let as many elementary schools know. I know that for my children's elementary school, they just announced they're going to have a viewing, which is wonderful, and invite everyone out onto the playground. But just trying to get word of mouth out. We are getting more and more requests for eclipse classes and how one would actually go about viewing an eclipse safely, which I know is something we wanted to touch on.
Absolutely. I know that was like literally just coming out of my mouth. Like, talk to us, because this is a ring of fire. This first one of the duo.
This first one of the duo, yes. So for this,
probably everybody's heard that with an eclipse, you have to really protect your eyes. Is that also true with this one on October 14th? And if so, how can people do that?
Yeah. So for this one, for an annular solar eclipse, it's really important. There's no time during this eclipse where it is okay to look at the sun. So we did have a total solar eclipse go across the United States back in 2017. And there was a lot of press about that one, just because astronomers and scientists called it the Great American Solar Eclipse, because it was only touching the United States from on land. And there is a period of time during a total solar eclipse where you can remove your glasses and see the sun's outer atmosphere. For an annular eclipse, the one that is happening on the 14th, there is no period of time where you can look at that eclipse. There's no phase of it where you cannot wear your glasses or look at it indirectly with an indirect viewer. I have a pair here that I can show you guys. There's lots of different types of glasses. And so this is your typical kind of Mylar film here that blocks out over 99.99% of the sunlight.
Always very stylish.
They're always very stylish. There's also, I enjoy these for people who look like myself, wear glasses. It's just a viewer that you can put in front of your eyes. But if you can't get the glasses, so most of the institutions that I listed will be handing out glasses or have a safe way for you to go and view the eclipse, either through a telescope or through a sun spotter. If you cannot go to one of those locations and you cannot receive eyeglasses, the solar viewing glasses, you can make your own viewers at home. And it can be as simple as taking a sheet of paper. And this was something we explained in our session this past Wednesday is you can use a simple sheet of paper, and if you poke a hole through it, you've just created a solar viewer, and you can direct that sunlight onto the ground or another white piece of paper and actually see all of the different phases of the eclipse that way. NASA, and we can put links if you want, Shelly, but NASA also has a way for you to make a box viewer. So there's a tiny hole here, and then you would hold it. So if we imagine this light behind me is the sun, we would hold it with the hole towards the sun and my eye up to the other hole that's on this side. And it would project to the back of the box. Another fun thing, because in addition to Shelly and the crew at Be Greater and R4, love to 3D print. And you can make a pinhole viewer with 3D printer as well. And this one's one I made specifically for Fiesta. And the other fun one that I think I introduced to you, Shelly, was that you can actually use household objects that have holes in them. So you could have a colander, which has lots of little holes that you could project the sun and a pattern onto the ground with. Or even I have a spatter guard that has tiny little holes. That would work as well.
I loved that colander one. As you know, I kind of flipped out about that. What I do want to clarify for people is the pinhole viewer, whether it's out of a colander or just a pinhole that you've pricked in a piece of paper, it's not you looking through that hole at the sun. It's you holding that up and letting the sun pass through the hole.
Yes.
And projecting it onto the ground or a wall, and then you looking at that ground or wall surface.
Yes, exactly.
So in fact, the box that you showed, Misty, I think that one shows that the best, that you're basically looking into that box, but your back is towards the sun.
Yes.
Right?
And that is why this is one of the favorites of NASA, is because if you're using this properly, there's not really a way for you to accidentally look at the sun. So, because you would have in all of these, you would have your back to the sun, and the sunlight would be projecting through the object, whether it's the sheet of paper, the box, the colander.
So we will put those links. There are a lot of places. I think the last time there was an eclipse, people were trying to sell eclipse glasses online for some ridiculous price. But NASA and NOAA, I believe there's a lot of really affordable and some even free options. And like Misty said, if you go to an event, oftentimes they've already taken the hassle out of ordering all of those and have plenty of them there for you to use.
And I want to add on to that, because this is so coincidental, I want to say. I went this morning to our neighborhood Walmart and walking through the aisles, and on one of the walls are eclipse glasses. I'm thinking, why are they selling these? So then I went home and I went online, and there's all these sites selling eclipse glasses. So I definitely take the approach, the many options available that Misty has talked about. But I also makes me lead to another question I have. And maybe it's because of social media, more awareness being made, but at least my perception, it seems like growing up to now, it seems like there's more eclipse-like events happening in the last several years, decades. Is that true? Is that just a bad perception, or?
Yeah, so the eclipses happen. We get solar eclipses, about 2 to 4 of them every year, and there's a total solar eclipse every 18 months. The important part with the ones the cycle that we're going through right now is that they're visible from land. So for the majority of the planet, right, is covered by water, and it would be very difficult to travel to some of them. Now, as cruises have become more popular, there are eclipse cruises you can take to go and travel out to the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic in order to see an eclipse. And there's even trips to go to Antarctica or the Arctic when eclipses happen there as well. But right now it's because the popularity and seeing more of it is because they're happening over the US and North America, and it's just easier access. There are more people within the paths of where the eclipses are happening right now.
Because I was thinking back to my childhood. I'm like, I think I only remember hearing about or watching an eclipse maybe once or twice in childhood. And It seems a lot more frequently, which leads me into, I said the solar eclipse duo,
Yes.
duo meaning
Two.
two. So we've talked about this one on October 14th.
Mm-hmm.
What's after that? Why is it a duo?
It's a duo because in April of 2024, specifically on April 8th, we're going to be having a total solar eclipse. So this one will actually, we won't have the path of totality where the total solar eclipse, the shadow of the moon is actually touching the ground. So you can see the sun completely blocked. Will not, unfortunately, it's not going to pass through New Mexico, but it will be very adjacent in Texas. And we're going to have a really significant partial solar eclipse here in New Mexico. But that total solar eclipse is awesome because it's going to start in Mazatlan, Mexico, and go north through Mexico, through Texas, through the Midwest, all the way up through New York and Maine, and out through Canada over the Atlantic Ocean. So it's covering a large swath of land and people, which is very cool. And that one's different because, so for all eclipses, what's happening is we have the moon going in front of the sun from our perspective here on Earth. For the annular solar eclipse, that one, the moon is not completely covering the sun because it's at its furthest in its orbit around the Earth. So when we talk about how far away the moon is from the Earth, scientists like to use an average distance, but it actually has an elliptical orbit. So there are periods of time where it's closest to the Earth. We call that perigee. And when it's furthest away from Earth, we call that apogee. So for an annular solar eclipse, it's not completely covering the sun because the moon is at apogee. It's at its furthest point in its orbit. For a total solar eclipse, the moon's actually closer to perigee, and it will completely cover up the surface of the sun. And then that's how we get the white pictures with the white extension, and that's the sun's outer atmosphere, which we call the corona.
That's amazing. So, we could probably talk about this a long time. And it's super interesting. One of the things I love is that you have a children's book that you've published. And I often find that like the best way for me to learn about a topic that I don't know a whole lot about is to check out children's books. So I kind of asked you, I know that you must have it there in front of you. I have my copy here on the bookshelf, but it's a little out of reach. But tell us about that process, Misty. Not just the book, but like how that book even came to be, because I think it's such an interesting story.
Yeah. So back in 2016, there was the Berkeley and Google decided to work together in order to create what they wanted to call the Eclipse Mega Movie. So in 2017, like I said before, we had the total solar eclipse that started on the coast in Oregon and went across the United States and exited out through the Carolinas. And they decided that they wanted to try to get citizen scientists, so photographers, amateur astronomers, anyone who wanted to be involved who had a camera and could take pictures during totality to study that outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona. So they could study it from coast to coast and how it changed on a very minute time scale if you had a lot of people stationed across that path of totality. And so I decided to participate, and my kiddos and my husband were very encouraging and said, okay, we'll travel. We were already had moved to New Mexico at the time, and we traveled all the way up to Casper, Wyoming in order to be a part of this. That's where I got stationed, thankfully, because it was near my parents where they lived in Wyoming at the time. And I took a ton of pictures, and I thought, I should turn this into a book. I should turn my children's experience of waking up before the sun had even risen to travel to Casper in order to catch the total solar eclipse from their perspective. And the title of the book is Where Did the Sun Go? And that was actually something my son said while we were there. He, during totality, he went, wait, where did it go? He was only 4 at the time. So I was like, well, I got my title. Okay, this needs to happen. So
it's really special. Such a great story. So we talked about the children's book, obviously, and you talked about your son's experience, like where did the sun go? How do we, not only during the eclipse, but even just with our children, what are some of your favorite ways maybe to share about an eclipse or the scale of
That's
The
okay.
solar system, the scale of the solar system. Sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's it? You got some ideas for me, Misty?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the thing that I have found in working with kids is my curiosity and my asking questions is one of the best ways to encourage them to do that on their own. I have my PhD, but I don't know the answer to everything. And I tell my kids that all the time, whether it's my actual two children or it's the kids that I'm talking to or educating at that time. I have to look things up too. And when I get a question where I don't know the answer, I say, oh, I don't know. Let's look it up. What do you think? Where do you think we're going to find? And I think encouraging that curiosity is one of the most essential things that we can do, particularly with children. Children are natural scientists. Scientists like to say that because we see ourselves in kids. They ask questions, they explore. They really are. And from figuring out how to walk and what gravity is, right? Like they're being little scientists using their legs trying to figure it out. And I think that's probably my biggest thing. And then for me, it's just always when I find a cool way to present something, I have to share it. There was a period of time where maybe I didn't necessarily because I was afraid to share all of the things I had rattling around inside of my head, but I just do now. And so for Shelley, for the solar system, and particularly with eclipses, I actually happen to have a scale version if you want to see it. But one of the best things for showing that is like I always like to tell kids my superpower is math, and so with my superpower, I can shrink the Earth down to about an inch across, and if I do that, I can shrink the moon to a quarter of an inch across. And then with my even more spectacular superhero math skills, I can put them all on the same, and you guys will have to let me know. I can't see how far back I need to go. I can make it so that this is the average distance between the two of them. So if we have the Earth at an inch and the moon at a quarter of an inch, they're about 30 Earths apart. So it's about 30 inches apart. And you can actually make scale eclipses that way. So you can take the yardstick and the Earth and the scaled moon outside, and you can align them so that the sunlight is passing so that the shadow of the moon reaches your scaled Earth, which is what happens during a total solar eclipse.
Very cool. That's a great tip. I love that. Scale it down to a model of less than 36 inches.
So I'm going to take this off slightly to a different direction. In high school, I had friends, and actually some I'm still connected, that were in astronomy club. And some of them, it's still a passion of theirs. And so I'm trying to get a sense from you, well, how do you keep your pulse in the world of astronomy? And if somebody was considering, I mean, they have a love for the stars, any career tracks for that? Because we have listeners, and young listeners that may be considering this as a field, but what does it mean ultimately?
For myself, when I was younger, definitely, especially here in New Mexico, we have a lot of star parties. So we have the Albuquerque Astronomical Society, or TAS, which is very active and has lots of star parties. There's also the Rio Rancho Astronomical Society, which also has lots of star parties. And we're kind of in a unique position here where if we go outside of one of our major cities, we have very dark skies and you can see the Milky Way. And so I do encourage people, if they're interested in astronomy or the stars, to reach out to one of those local organizations. I know a lot of the high schools have astronomy clubs. There's a lot of STEAM educators in both the elementary schools and middle schools in the area as well. And they're all very interested in astronomy. I think being able to go see the Milky Way, I'm remembering right now when I was a little kid and I grew up in big cities on the East Coast. And so I was lucky if I could see the constellation Orion, like during the wintertime. And being able to just take my kids outside and point to as many constellations and stars and the planets when they're parading across the sky here is a very unique experience versus growing up in the big city. So I think if someone's interested here, there's a lot of opportunities. I think we also live in the age of obviously social media. So there's a lot more content creators on YouTube and on TikTok and those places that are reaching out to trying to bring in a different audience about astronomy and science in general.
Well, that's really important. I think just a couple weeks ago, I was talking with the woman who's in charge of the Rio Rancho Astronomy Club and about one of their nights coming up. You're right. And that is one of the things we talk here about, what makes the Southwest so special. And this is another one of those things, right? That we can go lay out on the trampoline in our backyard with our kids and really enjoy seeing the stars. It's just so beautiful.
And I was born in the Midwest and lived around Chicago, and so I can appreciate what you're saying as far as what you can see is very limited. And coming out here, especially when you get away from the city, it just blows my mind. But I do remember early on here, at least in Rio Rancho, and they were very protective, the residents of the light pollution, because they wanted to have that ability to see the sky at night and see the stars up there. And I know there's a sensitivity across the Southwest and in other parts of the U.S. that they can enjoy that versus a big city. You're lucky if you see the moon some nights. So.
Yeah, one of the observatories I got to work at in grad school is Kip Peak National Observatory in Arizona, so just south of Tucson, Arizona. And one of the wonderful things that they did in Tucson is that in conjunction with the observatory, they actually switched to sodium lights for their street lights at night, and also very directional. So they point down, not out in all directions. And with those sodium lights, what astronomers can do is we can actually subtract that out, especially if we know specifically that the city is using those lights. So those emission lines show up in our data. We can subtract that out of our optical data, and it really does help with observing. And then on bringing up what we can see, because we look in the optical, right? My training in graduate school was actually primarily radio astronomy. So like we have the very large array here and outside of Socorro, and I've gotten to use that before. We're actually encroaching with cell phone usage on the millimeter wavelengths that I actually used on different radio telescopes. So the VLA is a centimeter array, so that it looks in the centimeter wavelengths of radio waves, and the millimeter wavelengths is another area where radio work is done to study star formation in other galaxies. And now we have the concern of cell phones and Starlink going across the sky. But yeah, that's also that actually mentioning Starlink just made me think too. I subscribe to, NASA has a ISS tracker that you can use, and you can see when the International Space Station is going to be in your sky. And so I take my kids outside when the International Space Station is going over. It's a very cool sight if you've never gone out to see it go across the sky. So that's another fun way to encourage looking up, is looking at satellites and what we have orbiting us as well, close by.
So what type of telescope do you have?
For myself, I have a reflective mirror telescope. It's not a very large telescope because I'm not a very large person and I like to be able to carry it and take it places myself. It's just an 8-inch Cassegrain telescope, but it's powerful. You can see a lot. You can see Jupiter, Saturn, the rings around Saturn. When I want to look at and image galaxies, I tend to use my camera, and I have a tracking mount for my camera to put it on because those objects are more diffuse and wider. So for the field of view.
There's just so much that we could talk about. You've had some props. I just want to make sure, what else would you like to share with our viewers, our audience, about the field of astronomy and maybe something that's just on your heart and that's important to you that you wanted to share?
I love to show this. So this is a 4-inch globe. It is filled with tiny little earths that are to scale. So this is about 4 inches across. Each of the little beads in here is about 1 millimeter across. So that means there's over 1 million of those little 1 millimeter size beads inside of this, which is pretty cool. for a scale of the sun to the earth. We haven't actually talked about that.
Okay. Yes,
Um,
that's what I
and I
wanted
think
to hear.
the other
What is
thing
that a
that
scale
is
of?
near and dear to
So,
my heart is encouraging more young girls and young women into scientific fields and technology. I think that when I was growing up, I had some encouragement in some areas, but it was more for my math abilities than it was necessarily for encouraging the continuation of who I was, which is a proclivity to talking. I didn't fit in grad school. I was very outgoing. I was very engaged in discussing lots of different topics and stuff like that, which was very unique for a lot of all of my male professors that I had. And I don't know that they knew what to do with me necessarily sometimes. um, and I want to encourage more. I'm encouraged because there are more women in the field now. There are more women who are doing science and in astronomy and physics, which are primarily some of our most underrepresented sciences. Just letting them know it's okay. Like, you can find your path. You can go into these sciences, and maybe, you know, you do have high marks and you're really good at a lot of the topics, but maybe your heart is in talking and educating and doing that. And that's still wonderful. And there's a place for you, and we need you, and we need that perspective. So yes, it's really important to me to help encourage lots of different people to explore sciences, so we have lots of different perspectives.
I had I think about this. So I've worked with a number of engineers, modelers, extremely intelligent people, know their craft, but they are not necessarily the best communicators. So
Yeah.
it takes somebody like you that can really bring it to our level to understand it so we can appreciate it more versus these numbers way out there. I have no idea what you're talking about. And I always mention this example when I was working with a bunch of air quality folks, and this modeler had went through 30 plus slides, and this gentleman from Arizona, I'll keep it G-rated, but basically, you know, you really sound, it really interests you. You really sound like you know what you're speaking about, but what the heck does this all mean? And that's what we need, folks that are outgoing that can really translate it. That's critical.
It is. And I think that in science in general, that needs to be encouraged more. And I think we're going in the right direction with that. And you had, Bobby, you'd mentioned, like, why am I suddenly hearing so much about eclipses too? And part of that is because you have the organizations like NASA and NOAA and NSF who are recognizing this, and they're trying to encourage more participation from just the community in general, and having the citizen science projects and things like that to bring more people in, because science is important for everyone. Like, the fact that we're communicating and we have cameras inside of, well, I'm using my laptop, but we have cameras that are like this and digital cameras. That's thanks to astronomical observations. So long time ago, we used what were called glass plates that had a film on them that we would expose. And, you know, in order to be able to discover more about galaxies and other stars, we had to improve our tools for gathering information and for data. And so astronomers really pushed that world into digital and to having CCD cameras. And then we all benefited from that. We now have cameras that are in our cell phones. We have them in our laptops. And so I think showing that connection between science and the world and bridging it together is really important, that, you know, we go forward together with things. So, but I think we're on the right path. I think we are doing that more now. So,
well, I know where you're going to be on October 14th, and I'll probably be there too. So people can find probably both of us at the Albuquerque Balloon Museum, or on the grass out in front of the museum, right? We'll be putting links to all the resources that you mentioned, Misty, and then also a link to your book series. You actually have 3 books in that series.
Yes.
About the solar system for kids, into our show notes so that people can learn more. And we're just so grateful to have had you as a guest today, and appreciate that you're going to save all of us from burning our eyes from and really understanding like the difference between an annual eclipse and what does that even mean and what is a ring of fire and all these important things. So thanks for being our guest today on STEM Southwest Podcast, and we just really appreciate your energy and the work that you do.
Thanks for having me.
Hey there, this is Shelley, and I am so glad that you have stopped by STEM Southwest. Can I ask a favor? If you've gotten some value out of our episodes, if you are just powered by nerd power and are excited about what we're doing, or if you're new to us and you've got just an interest, subscribe now and help us grow by doing that. Then take a moment and give us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast player, because we could use your support and help. We are trying to raise up an army of STEM Southwest supporters. And then last, think about sharing our podcast with your friends, your families, or even complete STEM strangers, because, it's all about making the world a better place and having more STEM rock stars highlighted and connected. Stop by our website if you're looking for resources, and you're going to find a lot of things that's going to grow over time. So continue to stop on in and join us. Subscribe now and support STEMSW.com.
You've been listening to the STEM Southwest Podcast. Nerd on, fellow STEM nerds.